From a severed manhood in a pickle jar to a director's father who designed Disneyland's castle, Foxy Brown hides bizarre production secrets, British bans, and Hollywood feuds that make the on-screen revenge look tame compared to what happened behind the cameras. Fact 1. Secret sequel sabotage. What most people don't realize is that Foxy Brown was never supposed to be its own movie at all, but rather a direct continuation of Pam Grier's previous hit film Coffee from 1973. Director Jack Hill had already written a complete script for what he planned to call Burn, Coffee, Burn, which would have brought back Grier's vengeful nurse character for another round of street justice against drug dealers and corrupt officials. The original sequel script was ready to go into production when American International Pictures suddenly got cold feet about making a follow-up film, despite the fact that Coffee had been a massive box office success for the studio. This last-minute decision by the executives created a serious problem for Hill, who had already committed to directing the project and had Pam Grier attached to star once again. Rather than scrap the entire production, Hill made the desperate choice to quickly rewrite his sequel script to transform it into a standalone film. He changed the character's name from Coffee to Foxy Brown and altered enough details to make it seem like a completely different story, even though the basic plot structure and many scenes remained largely the same. This frantic rewriting process happened so close to the start of filming that Hill didn't have enough time to properly establish key background details about the new character. The rushed nature of these script changes explains some of the movie's more confusing elements, particularly the fact that Foxy Brown's actual profession is never clearly explained to the audience. Since Coffee had been a hospital nurse, Hill couldn't use that same job for his new character, but the tight deadline meant he never got around to writing in a replacement career for Foxy, leaving viewers to wonder what she actually does for a living when she's not seeking revenge. Fact 2. Mystery Job Dilemma. If you watch Foxy Brown carefully, you'll notice something strange that most viewers never pick up on. The movie never actually tells us what Foxy does for work. Unlike most action heroes who have clearly defined careers that drive the plot, Foxy Brown exists in a professional vacuum that leaves audiences guessing about how she supports herself when she's not hunting down the criminals who killed her boyfriend. This unusual omission wasn't an artistic choice by director Jack Hill, but rather the direct result of the chaotic script changes that transformed the project from a Coffee sequel into a standalone film. In the original Coffee movie, Pam Grier played a hospital nurse who used her medical access to get close to drug dealers and corrupt officials, making her profession a crucial part of both her character and the story's logic. When Hill was forced to rewrite his sequel script and create the new character of Foxy Brown, he found himself in a tight spot regarding her occupation. Since he couldn't simply make Foxy Brown another nurse without drawing obvious comparisons to Coffee, he needed to come up with a completely different job that would still give her the skills and motivation needed for the revenge plot he had already written. The problem was that Hill was working under an extremely compressed timeline, with production schedules already locked in and actors committed to specific dates. The director simply didn't have enough time to properly develop a new backstory that would explain Foxy's profession, her fighting abilities, or her connections to the criminal underworld that she navigates so expertly throughout the film. As a result, Foxy Brown remains one of the most capable action heroes in cinema history, whose day job is a complete mystery, leaving viewers to imagine whether she might be anything from a secretary to a social worker to someone who simply inherited money and doesn't need to work at all. Fact 3. Lightning. Fast filming feat. The entire production of Foxy Brown was completed in just 17 days, which is an astonishingly short filming schedule even by the standards of 1970s low-budget exploitation cinema. To put this time frame in perspective, most major Hollywood films today take anywhere from 30 to 100 days to shoot, while even modest independent movies typically require at least 3 to 4 weeks of principal photography. Director Jack Hill managed to capture all of the movie's action sequences, dramatic scenes, and location shots in less than 3 weeks, which required an incredibly disciplined approach to filmmaking that left no room for mistakes or extensive retakes. This breakneck pace meant that Hill and his crew had to be completely prepared before cameras started rolling, with every shot planned out in advance and the entire cast ready to perform their scenes with minimal rehearsal time. The 17-day schedule was partly driven by budget constraints from American International Pictures, which specialized in making profitable films with minimal financial investment. The studio's business model relied on keeping production costs as low as possible while still delivering entertaining movies that would appeal to drive-in theater audiences and urban moviegoers looking for action-packed entertainment. Despite the time pressure, Hill's experience with low-budget filmmaking helped him maintain the quality that made Foxy Brown a standout entry in the blaxploitation genre. He had previously directed several movies under similar constraints, including his earlier collaboration with Pam Grier on Coffee, so he understood how to work efficiently without sacrificing the energy and style that audiences expected from these types of revenge thrillers. The rapid shooting schedule also meant that the actors had to be completely committed to their roles from day one, since there wasn't time for extensive character development or multiple attempts at getting the perfect take for each scene. Fact 4. Disney Castle Connection. One of the most unexpected connections in Foxy Brown's production history involves Disney magic, though you'd never guess it from watching Pam Grier deliver street justice to drug dealers and corrupt officials. Director Jack Hill grew up in a Hollywood family deeply connected to the entertainment industry, but his father's most famous work had nothing to do with gritty exploitation films and everything to do with creating dreams for children around the world. Roland Everett Hill, Jack's father, was a highly respected set designer and art director who worked for major studios including First National Pictures and Warner Brothers from the 1920s through the 1950s. During his long career in Hollywood, the elder Hill contributed to the visual design of numerous classic films, including early sound pictures like The Jazz Singer and later adventure movies such as Captain Blood and Captain Horatio Hornblower. However, Roland Hill's most enduring legacy came when he transitioned from movie sets to theme park design and became one of the key architects behind Disneyland's most recognizable landmark. He was responsible for designing the interior spaces and architectural details of Sleeping Beauty Castle, the fairy tale fortress that serves as the centerpiece of Walt Disney's original theme park in Anaheim, California. This means that the same creative genes that helped design one of America's most beloved family destinations also produced the director who would go on to create some of the most violent and sexually explicit films of the blaxploitation era. The contrast between Roland Hill's wholesome Disney work and his son Jack's gritty urban revenge movies represents one of the more amusing generational shifts in Hollywood history. Jack Hill grew up surrounded by the artistry and craftsmanship that his father brought to both movie studios and Disney's Imagineering department, giving him an early appreciation for visual storytelling that would later influence his approach to directing low-budget action films. Fact 5. British Video. Nasty ban. Foxy Brown found itself caught up in one of the most controversial censorship campaigns in British history when it was officially seized and banned in the United Kingdom during the infamous video nasty panic of the 1980s. The film was confiscated under Section 3 of the Obscene Publications Act of 1959, which gave authorities the power to remove any material they considered likely to deprave and corrupt the general public. The video nasty controversy began when moral crusader Mary Whitehouse successfully lobbied for stricter controls on what films could be sold or rented on home video in Britain. Her campaign led to the Video Recordings Act of 1984, which created a list of banned titles that became known as video nasties because of their violent or sexual content. Foxy Brown ended up on this blacklist alongside notorious horror films like Cannibal Holocaust and The Last House on the Left. What made Foxy Brown's ban particularly absurd was that the film had originally been released in American theaters in 1974 without major controversy, but British authorities decided it was too dangerous for home viewing a decade later. When the film was finally allowed back into the UK market in 1987, censors demanded that more than 7 minutes of footage be removed before it could receive an 18 certificate that would permit legal sale to adults. The cuts included most of the film's violence and several scenes that British censors considered too sexually explicit, which significantly altered the movie's impact and narrative flow. It wasn't until 1998 that British audiences could finally see an uncut version of Foxy Brown, meaning that UK film fans had to wait nearly 25 years after the movie's original release to experience it as Jack Hill had intended. This created the bizarre situation where Quentin Tarantino's Jackie Brown, which was directly inspired by Foxy Brown, was available in Britain 16 years before viewers there could see the complete original film. Fact 6. Studio feud drama. Jack Hill's relationship with American International Pictures nearly ended before Foxy Brown was ever made, all because of a single moment of brutal honesty that almost cost him his career in Hollywood. The drama began when AIP executives invited Hill to a special screening of a different film they had been working on, eager to show off their latest project to one of their regular directors and get his professional opinion on the finished product. Unfortunately for everyone involved, Hill was completely unimpressed with what he saw on screen that night. Rather than politely sitting through the entire movie and offering diplomatic feedback afterward, Hill made the career-threatening decision to simply get up and walk out of the screening room in the middle of the film, making it crystal clear to the AIP executives that he thought their movie was terrible. This public display of contempt infuriated the studio bosses, who felt that Hill had disrespected them and embarrassed the company in front of other industry professionals who were also attending the screening. The executives were so angry about Hill's walkout that they made a formal vow never to hire him again, effectively blacklisting him from future AIP projects and potentially ending his relationship with one of the most important studios in the low-budget film industry. The situation looked hopeless for Hill until his previous collaboration with Pam Grier proved to be his salvation. When Coffee became a massive box office hit for American International Pictures in 1973, earning far more money than anyone at the studio had expected, AIP founder Samuel Z. Arkoff decided that making money was more important than holding grudges. Arkoff personally reached out to Hill to reconcile their professional relationship, recognizing that the director's talent for creating profitable exploitation films was too valuable to lose over a moment of wounded pride. This reconciliation directly led to Hill being hired to direct the sequel that would eventually become Foxy Brown. Fact 7. Designer wardrobe regret. Director Jack Hill found himself in a major disagreement with his own wardrobe department over Pam Grier's stunning outfits in Foxy Brown, and he spent years believing he had made the wrong decision by allowing the costumes to be so elaborate and fashionable. The conflict arose because Grier had become a major star after the success of Coffee, which meant the studio wanted to present her as even more glamorous and stylish than she had appeared in her previous film. The wardrobe department brought in Ruthie West, a California fashion designer who had already made a name for herself, styling some of the biggest musical acts of the early 1970s. West had worked as the personal stylist for the Jackson 5, Thelma Houston, Bobby Gentry, the Curtis Brothers, and Sisters Love, giving her serious credentials in creating looks that would appeal to fashionable audiences who followed the latest trends in clothing and accessories. West designed 14 different costumes for Grier's character, each one more eye-catching and stylish than the last, featuring bold colors, dramatic silhouettes, and cutting-edge fashion elements that perfectly captured the spirit of mid-70s style. However, Hill was deeply concerned that these trendy outfits would make his movie look dated within just a few years, worried that future audiences would watch Foxy Brown and immediately think of it as a product of its specific time period, rather than a timeless action story. Hill's fears seemed justified throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, when the 70s were generally considered unfashionable, and the movie's costumes did indeed look like obvious period pieces. However, his opinion completely changed when the 70s nostalgia movement began in the mid-1990s, suddenly making Foxy Brown's wardrobe seem cool and desirable again. Hill eventually admitted that West's costume designs had become one of the film's most memorable and iconic elements, helping to establish Foxy Brown as a lasting pop culture figure. Fact 8. Jackson 5. Songwriter connection. The funky, soulful soundtrack that perfectly captures Foxy Brown's street-smart attitude was created by Willie Hutch, a talented musician who had already achieved massive success writing hit songs for some of Motown Records' biggest stars before he ever worked on a single movie score. Hutch was far from a typical film composer, having built his reputation as a songwriter and producer who understood exactly how to create music that would connect with both radio audiences and record buyers across the country. Hutch's most famous songwriting credit came when he co-wrote "I'll Be There" for the Jackson 5, a tender ballad that became one of the group's biggest hits and showcased Michael Jackson's incredible vocal abilities at a very young age. The song reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart and became a signature tune for the Jackson 5, proving that Hutch had the talent to create music that could appeal to mainstream audiences while still maintaining the authentic soul sound that Motown was famous for. Beyond his work with the Jackson 5, Hutch had also served as a behind-the-scenes producer for other major Motown artists, including Michael Jackson's early solo recordings and projects by the legendary Smokey Robinson. This experience working with top-tier performers gave Hutch a deep understanding of how to craft songs that would enhance an artist's personality and complement their natural style, skills that translated perfectly to creating film soundtracks. When Hutch was hired to compose the music for Foxy Brown, he brought this same attention to character and mood to his film work, creating a soundtrack that feels like an extension of Pam Grier's tough, confident personality. The music perfectly matches the movie's blend of action, sexuality, and urban cool, with tracks that became classics of the blaxploitation genre and would later be heavily sampled by hip-hop artists who recognized the timeless quality of Hutch's compositions. Fact 9. Underwear continuity error. One of the most embarrassing continuity mistakes in Foxy Brown involves a corrupt judge's underwear, creating a glaring error that somehow made it through the editing process and into the final version of the movie that audiences saw in theaters. The mistake occurs during a humiliating scene where Foxy Brown and her partner Claudia are working as high-class call girls to gather information about the criminal organization they're trying to bring down. In the hotel room scene, Foxy and Claudia are entertaining this particular judge as part of their undercover operation, and the two women deliberately embarrass him by stripping off his clothes and making jokes about his body before shoving him out into the hallway of the hotel. The scene clearly shows the women removing the judge's boxer shorts as part of their plan to humiliate him, leaving him completely naked and forcing him to cover himself with his hands as he tries to maintain some dignity. However, when the camera follows the judge into the hallway immediately after this stripping scene, viewers can clearly see that he's now wearing a pair of white briefs, even though the previous scene had established that all of his underwear had been removed just moments before. The judge is shown desperately trying to cover his crotch area with his hands, but the white briefs are unmistakably visible despite the fact that he's supposed to be completely nude. This continuity error likely occurred because of the 17-day filming schedule that didn't allow much time for careful review of footage between scenes. The actor playing the judge was probably given the white briefs to wear for modesty purposes during the hallway scene, but the filmmakers forgot to account for the fact that the previous scene had specifically shown his underwear being removed. The mistake is particularly noticeable because the judge's embarrassment and attempts to cover himself don't make much sense if he's actually wearing underwear underneath. Fact 10. Impossible physics siphon. During Foxy Brown's dramatic escape from the remote farmhouse where she's been held captive, the film presents a scientifically impossible sequence that demonstrates how the rushed production schedule sometimes led to oversights in basic logic and physics. The scene occurs after Foxy has been drugged with heroin and transported to an isolated location where her captors plan to break her spirit before shipping her off to work in the international sex trade. In order to escape from the farmhouse and get revenge on her captors, Foxy needs to create a fire that will serve as both a distraction and a weapon against the men who are holding her prisoner. The script calls for her to siphon gasoline from a storage barrel that's positioned outside one of the farmhouse windows, then use that gasoline to set the building ablaze and make her getaway while her captors are dealing with the fire. The problem with this escape sequence is that the gasoline container inside the room is clearly positioned at a higher elevation than the barrel outside the window, making it physically impossible for Foxy to siphon the fuel using the method shown in the film. Siphoning works by using gravity to pull liquid from a higher container to a lower one, but the setup in Foxy Brown has the flow going uphill, which would require a pump or some other mechanical device to move the gasoline. This scientific impossibility likely occurred because the filmmakers were more focused on creating a dramatic and visually interesting escape sequence than on ensuring that the physics of the situation made sense. The 17-day shooting schedule probably didn't allow time for anyone to double-check whether the siphoning setup would actually work in real life, leading to a scene that looks exciting but defies the basic laws of physics. Despite this technical error, the escape sequence remains one of the most memorable and intense parts of the movie, proving that sometimes dramatic impact can overcome scientific accuracy in entertainment. Fact 11. Hip-hop sampling legacy. Willie Hutch's soundtrack for Foxy Brown became an unexpected treasure trove for hip-hop producers decades after the movie's original release, with some of the biggest names in rap music discovering that the film's funky, soulful tracks provided perfect building blocks for their own hit songs. This musical recycling process, known as sampling, allows hip-hop artists to take small portions of older recordings and incorporate them into new compositions, creating a bridge between different generations of music. The most heavily sampled track from the Foxy Brown soundtrack was Hospital Prelude of Love theme, a moody, atmospheric piece that caught the attention of numerous rap producers who recognized its potential as the foundation for hard-hitting hip-hop beats. The Notorious B.I.G. used this track as the basis for one of his songs, helping to introduce Willie Hutch's music to a completely new audience of rap fans who had never seen the original 1974 movie. Other major hip-hop artists who have sampled from the Foxy Brown soundtrack include Jay-Z, Nipsey Hussle, Rick Ross featuring CeeLo Green, Mobb Deep, and Masta Ace, demonstrating the lasting appeal of Hutch's compositions across different eras of rap music. The theme of Foxy Brown also found new life in tracks by Big K.R.I.T. and Cassius, while Overture of Foxy Brown was incorporated into songs by Z-Ro, Young Jeezy, Wiz Khalifa, Freeway featuring Scarface, and Trey featuring Young Noble. This sampling phenomenon gave the Foxy Brown soundtrack a second life in popular culture, introducing Willie Hutch's music to listeners who were born long after the blaxploitation era had ended. The hip-hop community's embrace of these tracks also helped cement Foxy Brown's status as a cultural touchstone that continues to influence artists and audiences more than 50 years after its original release. Fact 12. Brown Nipple Revolution. Pam Grier made a deliberate and groundbreaking decision to appear nude in many of her early films, including Foxy Brown, as part of what she boldly called the Brown Nipple Revolution in a candid interview with Rolling Stone magazine. Grier's choice to embrace nudity wasn't simply about following the conventions of exploitation cinema, but rather represented a calculated effort to challenge deeply ingrained ideas about beauty, sexuality, and desirability that dominated Hollywood during the 1970s. At the time Foxy Brown was made, the entertainment industry operated under very narrow definitions of what constituted sexual attractiveness, with black women largely excluded from being seen as the ultimate objects of desire in movies, magazines, and other forms of popular media. The prevailing beauty standards in Hollywood were overwhelmingly focused on white actresses, leaving very little space for black women to be portrayed as glamorous, sexy, or sexually powerful on screen. Grier recognized that her nude scenes represented an opportunity to expand these limited perceptions and force audiences to confront their assumptions about black female sexuality and beauty. By choosing to appear naked in her films, she was making a statement that black women deserved to be seen as just as desirable and sexually appealing as their white counterparts, challenging the racist beauty standards that had long dominated American entertainment. In her Rolling Stone interview, Grier explained that she wanted to push the boundaries of how black women were perceived in the acting world, using her own body and sexuality as tools for social change. She understood that her nude scenes would generate attention and controversy, but she was willing to accept that reaction in order to create new possibilities for how black actresses could be presented and perceived by mainstream audiences. This revolutionary approach helped establish Grier as not just an action star, but as a pioneering figure who used her platform to challenge racial stereotypes. Fact 13. Apocalypse Now student film. One of the most surprising connections between Foxy Brown's director and mainstream Hollywood involves a student film that Jack Hill made while attending UCLA Film School, which ended up providing direct inspiration for the climactic scenes of Francis Ford Coppola's epic war movie Apocalypse Now. Hill and Coppola were classmates at UCLA during the early 1960s, where they worked together on various student productions and developed a friendship that would influence both of their careers in unexpected ways. Hill's student film was called The Host, and it was heavily influenced by his reading of James Fraser's anthropological work, The Golden Bough, a famous study of mythology, religion, and folklore from around the world. Hill's writing teacher was so impressed with the project that he told Hill, "This is the story that Fraser forgot to tell," recognizing the creative way that Hill had adapted the academic material into a compelling visual narrative. Years later, when Coppola was struggling to find the right ending for Apocalypse Now during its troubled production in the Philippines, he remembered Hill's student film and decided to incorporate its themes and visual approach into his own movie. The influence was so direct that when Apocalypse Now was finally released, Hill was shocked to notice that Coppola had included The Golden Bough among the books, prominently displayed on Colonel Kurtz's shelf in the final act of the film. The connection was later confirmed by Steve Burram, who had worked as the cameraman on Hill's original student film and went on to serve as second-unit cameraman on Apocalypse Now. Burram told Hill that the crew members were actually joking during production that they were essentially recreating Jack Hill's student film, making the influence explicit rather than coincidental. This means that Hill's early experimental work at UCLA ended up contributing to one of the most celebrated and ambitious films in American cinema history. Fact 14. Hot dog stand menu mix-up. A confusing continuity error in one of Foxy Brown's early scenes creates a puzzling situation where characters order food that doesn't actually appear to be available at the establishment they're visiting, highlighting the kind of small mistakes that can slip through during a rushed 17-day filming schedule. The scene takes place at a street food stand where Link Brown, Foxy's drug-dealing brother played by Antonio Fargas, is meeting with two police officers to discuss some kind of business arrangement. The food stand prominently displays signs advertising hot dogs on its support columns, making it clear to viewers that this is supposed to be a typical urban hot dog cart or stand that serves simple street food to customers throughout the day. However, when Link and the two police officers place their orders with the vendor, all three men specifically ask for tacos and coffee, which seems like a perfectly reasonable request for people grabbing a quick meal. The problem becomes apparent when careful viewers notice that the menu board visible on the back wall of the food stand doesn't actually list tacos among the available items, creating a contradiction between what the characters are ordering and what the establishment supposedly serves. This suggests that the script called for the characters to order tacos, but the props department either forgot to include tacos on the visible menu or used a generic hot dog stand setup without checking whether it matched the dialogue. Later in the same scene, when Link calls his sister Foxy on the phone to tell her where he is, he refers to his location as a taco stand, which makes sense given what he ordered, but contradicts the hot dog signage that viewers can clearly see in the background. This type of small but noticeable error was probably the result of the extremely tight production schedule that didn't allow much time for double-checking details between the script, props, and set decoration departments. Fact 15. AFI Heroes, Villain's Honor. Nearly 30 years after Foxy Brown first hit movie screens, the character received an unexpected honor from one of the most prestigious film organizations in the United States when she was nominated for inclusion on the American Film Institute's 100 Years, 100 Heroes and Villains list in 2003. This nomination represented a remarkable achievement for a character who had originated in a low-budget blaxploitation film, demonstrating that Foxy Brown had transcended her humble beginnings to become a genuinely significant figure in American cinema history. The American Film Institute is a highly respected organization that was established by the National Endowment for the Arts to preserve and celebrate the heritage of motion pictures in the United States, making their recognition particularly meaningful for films and characters that might not always receive attention from mainstream critics or academic institutions. The AFI's Heroes and Villains project was designed to identify the most memorable and culturally important heroic and villainous characters from a century of American filmmaking. Out of the thousands of characters who have appeared in American movies over the decades, only 400 were selected as nominees for this prestigious list, putting Foxy Brown in very exclusive company alongside iconic figures from classic Hollywood films and modern blockbusters. The nomination process involved film scholars, critics, and industry professionals who had to consider not just a character's popularity, but their lasting cultural impact and influence on subsequent films and characters. Foxy Brown's inclusion among these 400 nominees was particularly significant because it represented official recognition that blaxploitation films and their characters had made genuine contributions to American cinema, rather than being dismissed as mere exploitation or disposable entertainment. The nomination acknowledged that Pam Grier's portrayal of Foxy Brown had created a character who continued to resonate with audiences and influence filmmakers long after the blaxploitation era had ended.